If you play Dungeons and Dragons and you're a dungeon master, if you're a game manager, if you do any TTRPG, villains are one of the hardest things to do. And so there's a couple of things to really consider to creating epic villains, or sometimes villains that just work. So let's dive right on into this and let's talk about some great ways to actually keep your villains at the forefront of your characters' minds. The first thing is a villain that's too big for size. What I mean by this, if you look at a lot of the movies that are out there, villains play a much larger role and their influence is seen and the characters don't have any direct, really, interaction with them. Everything's myths and legends. Imagine the curse of Strahd, but take Strahd and never actually have him show up. Only what people tell you about Strahd, the interactions that people have had that maybe have attended court. What happens is when a villain is too big for size and you never actually meet them, that can kind of build the tension up. However, it gives you an option. When you actually meet that villain, you can downplay it, you can upplay it, you can expand it, you can meet the expectations, you can exceed the expectations. It gives you as a dungeon master some room to play with that story. Now, sometimes that works and sometimes that doesn't work, but I love the foreshadowing of always talking about the villain, always talking about the person, always talking about what the things they're doing. This also means that sometimes the villain doesn't actually exist. If the villain is giving its orders, maybe there's someone behind the villain. And through all the plots and intricacies that you do as a dungeon master, you notice that, hey, the villain is actually being manipulated by something else. When the villain doesn't directly show you how villainous they are, it allows you as the dungeon master a bit of room to finagle and move things around to when the characters come up with an idea or they think of something that can be right. If you concrete set your villain to be rock solid, this is the villain and this is how it works, that can sometimes lead you down a road that may not be fun. And so one thing I would like to say is if you like Dungeons & Dragons, comment, subscribe, like, share this video, help us. Now we do have a Patreon, you can always check it out. We do have a bunch of books that are coming out, but if you can't afford that, subscribe, like, share this, help us grow the channel. It means the world to me. That's my self-promotion as plug. So now we're gonna go right back to how to create epic villains. Another thing with villains is making them relatable. Now, I don't like doing this. As a dungeon master, I don't like relatable villains. The reason why? Well, I like bad guys to be bad guys. I like my heroes to have someone concrete to fight against. A relatable villain is one of those that can turn a party actually into the bad side, especially if they understand why the villain is doing the things they say they do and they agree with it. Now, if that's the type of campaign you want to run, go for it. Absolutely. The other thing with making villains relatable is you have to make their motivations known. And so that's the hard part about relatable villains. How are you going to let the party understand where the villain is coming from? Are they going to monologue? Is it through their actions? Does your party have interactions within the villain in a social setting which doesn't allow combat? And so therefore they learn about the villain, or they see how other people are treating the villain. When you make a villain relatable, it's one thing for the villain to monologue. It's another thing to see how things affect the villain. It's another thing to be part of that social dynamic in which you can't actually attack the villain. That's also important that the people already know who the villain is, so they can learn about that villain from the standpoint. Now, in certain games, combat just ends in death, and you can just try to kill anyone and that's fine. But we found in Curse of Strahd that the villain can show up and can interact, and there's a bad idea when there's a bunch of guards around the villain because they're protected that you shouldn't do that. You can have the villain, the main bad guy, the BBEG, interact with your party without them having to damage one another, to fight, to be a combatant, because that's not in the villain's best interest to just wipe out the party, even though it may be who disposed of them. Think about our political landscape. We have lots of politics where politicians agree, but they just don't go around killing each other. For the most part, sometimes, unless it's Game of Thrones. Another major villain is the unknown villain, the twist. Now, I, once again, am not a huge fan of the twist. The thing is, the twist should be whoever the party thinks it is, in my opinion. The best part is when the players go, oh, it's the bread maker because, and then all of a sudden they connect all of these dots that you as the dungeon master didn't have a clue. I have had more twist villains be who the party discovered because it made sense than anything else. Very rarely can I actually plan a twist. And that's the hardest part about the twist villain, is that either one, it's so clear it's not even funny, or two, you've done such an amazing job of hiding all the dots, the players are like, what? And then they feel betrayed. So the twist villain is a villain that you absolutely need to make sure that you're doing right. And I can't really give you advice because it depends on the players, it depends on the characters, it depends on how much your players put their own knowledge into the game and how long they've been playing this game and how many books they read and how paranoid they are. Also, that's the other reason I don't like to do the twist as a villain, as in the bread maker or the cobble maker or the widow down the road, is because when you do the villain as a twist, you make the players start to question everything that you've done as a dungeon master. Are you telling us the truth? Do we need to look at everything? Are you actually giving us all the facts? Those are things that you have to consider if you throw a super big twist at your party, especially when you do it often. So if you're going to use the twist villain, the villain that no one thought was there, make sure you use that sporadically. That's super important. My favorite villain of all times, my favorite BBEG, is the Lovecraftian villain, the horror that no one understands, that no one makes sense. And the thing is, as a dungeon master, I don't have to make it sense. I can literally have it doing the craziest things, going after the weirdest stuff for reasons that are unknown to the party, and they may never understand. Ancient evils think so far ahead in the future that the events they're trying to persuade are completely unknown to the people that are here. Things that progress beyond time do things that don't make sense. In fact, what about the Lovecraftian horror that's trying to do something good because it knows in the end it will turn bad? As a dungeon master, this is something that is great to do. You can take a BBEG and have it in the same interests as the party, and no one understands why. As a dungeon master, I do encourage you, though, to understand why, if this good thing happens, what are the chain of events that will unfold if A happens to get to Z, which will bring the destruction of the world. Understand that chain, because then that can become a campaign where the players put in motion something that's so good that creates a catastrophic change of events. It was good, but the fallout is horrible. Yes, it can be a twist. Yes, the players may feel betrayed, but when it's an ancient evil that's so old that no one understands, well, that feels a little different. They weren't betrayed by the cobble maker, by the widow. They were betrayed by something so ancient that they don't understand. So that's one of my favorite villains of all times. So, guys, as always, make sure you like, make sure you subscribe, and as always, we appreciate it. Now, today, you're going to stick around and actually take a look at one of our brand new monsters from the Fire Incursion that we will cover later on. And as always, guys, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you when? We'll see you next time.